Market Wizards by Jack D. Schwager. Picture this. You borrow $30,000 and turn it into $80 million. Not over decades of slow, steady investing, but through a series of gutsy, razor-sharp decisions in the wild world of financial markets. Sounds like pure fiction, right? The kind of thing that only happens in Hollywood. But here's the twist. The guy who pulled this off is absolutely real, and he's not the only one. There's this elite, almost legendary group of traders who've somehow cracked the code of the markets. They're not typical Wall Street types in expensive suits barking orders from corner offices. Most of them operate from quiet spaces, far from the chaos, and they've reached levels of success that seem almost impossible. So what makes these market wizards different from the countless people who crash and burn? Is there some secret ingredient? A hidden pattern in market chaos that only they can detect? This question obsessed a man named Jack D. Schwager for years. Now, Schwager wasn't some outsider peering through the window. He was a trader himself, and like so many others, he'd tasted bitter defeat. He'd done the research, crunched the numbers, analyzed every angle, and still managed to blow up his account. Multiple times. He learned the hard way that being intelligent wasn't enough. He had an advanced degree, a solid grasp of economics, but the market simply didn't care. It was humbling, even crushing. But instead of walking away defeated, Schwager became a detective. He set out on a mission to find the answers, not buried in dusty textbooks, but living inside the minds of the world's most extraordinary traders. He somehow convinced these intensely private, almost mythical figures to let him in. He interviewed the man who transformed $30,000 into $80 million. He spoke with a fund manager who delivered 5 straight years of triple-digit returns. He sat across from a trader who started with pocket change and became a dominant force in the bond market. What came from that quest is the book we're diving into today, Market Wizards. This isn't your standard investing guide. It's an expedition into the psychology of winning. What Schwager uncovered, and what we're about to discover together, is that the real secret to their mind-blowing success wasn't some magic formula. It had almost nothing to do with their specific techniques. Some were math nerds who relied on computers. Others traded purely on instinct. Some held positions for years, others for mere minutes. The real secret was their mindset, their discipline, their absolute mastery over the one thing anyone can truly control, themselves. So if you've ever wondered what it really takes to succeed at the highest level, not just in markets, but in any arena where the stakes are high, stick with me. By the time we're done, you'll understand the timeless principles of risk, discipline, and mindset that transform ordinary people into legends. You'll walk away with a roadmap, not of secret trading tricks, but of the mental framework that powers all great achievement. Our journey begins exactly where most trading stories do, with a spectacular, humiliating faceplant. Before they became legends, the market wizards were just regular people. They were beginners, brimming with misplaced confidence, and they made mistakes, colossal ones. Take Michael Marcus. This is a guy who eventually became one of the most successful traders on the planet, multiplying a company account by 500 times over a decade. But his career launch? More crash than launch. As a young man, a friend named John assured him he could double his money every 2 weeks, like magic. Marcus, smart but naive, handed over $1,000 of hard-earned savings. He didn't even bother asking how John planned to achieve this miracle. The promise was so seductive he didn't want to ruin it with pesky details. Marcus describes his first visit to a brokerage house like a kid entering a theme park. The polished mahogany desks, the hushed, almost sacred atmosphere, the enormous board on the wall with prices clicking away, it was intoxicating. He and John even brought binoculars like they were attending a sporting event. Then, a disembodied voice crackled over the loudspeaker recommending a trade. Marcus glanced at his expert advisor John, expecting to see the face of calm authority. Instead, John turned to him and asked, "Do you think we should do it?" At that moment, Marcus realized his expert knew absolutely nothing. They took the trade anyway. Almost supernaturally, the second their order filled, the prices on the big board started clicking downward. Down, down, down. They lost $100. Their next trade was in corn. Same result. Their third trade, wheat, also tanked. They started measuring success by how many days they could make their money last. The final crushing blow came from what John called a can't-lose trade, a spread in pork bellies that supposedly guaranteed profit. They placed the trade and, feeling confident for the first time, went to lunch. When they returned, Marcus's account was essentially gone. He'll never forget the image of John pounding his fist on the quote board, yelling in frustration, "Doesn't anyone want to make a guaranteed profit?" Turned out John didn't understand that the two pork belly contracts couldn't be delivered against each other. His guaranteed trade was fundamentally flawed from day one. Marcus was wiped out. He fired John, scraped together another $500, and promptly lost that too. His first 8 trades were all losers. You'd think he'd have walked away. You'd think the universe was sending a clear message, this isn't your game. But he didn't. For Marcus, and for nearly every great trader Schwager interviewed, this initial failure wasn't a stop sign. It was tuition, the price of admission to deeper understanding. Jack Schwager himself has a similar war story. Armed with his graduate economics degree, he was convinced he could predict market movements. He did an exhaustive analysis of the cotton market and concluded that prices, then at 25 cents a pound, would rise but peak around 32 cents. The market moved up, just as he'd predicted. As it approached his target, he confidently shorted it, expecting prices to fall. For a brief moment, they did. He felt a surge of triumph. He'd outsmarted the market. But his victory lasted about as long as a sneeze. The price quickly bounced back, and then began climbing relentlessly. 32 cents, 33, 34, 35. He held on stubbornly, convinced his analysis was right, and the market was simply being irrational. Finally, with his entire account evaporated, he was forced out of the position. That devastating loss turned out to be one of the luckiest things that ever happened to him, because cotton didn't stop at 35 cents. It didn't stop until it hit 99 cents a pound. Had he started with more capital, he would have lost everything. These stories aren't unique. Almost every trader Schwager interviewed had a going bust moment, a time when they lost everything or came terrifyingly close. A time when their ego, their overconfidence, and their lack of respect for the market's raw power led to disaster. Paul Tudor Jones, a trader of almost mythical status, tells of a cotton trade in 1979 that nearly destroyed him. He was young, successful, and feeling invincible. He put on a massive long position, an act of pure swagger. In an instant, watching the other traders in the pit, he realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He saw that the market was headed straight down, and that it was my blood that was going to carry it there. He lost 60 to 70% of his clients, equity, on that single trade. He was so shattered he almost quit trading altogether. So what separates these men from the countless others, with similar disaster stories, whose narratives end right there, in failure? It's what they did next. For Paul Tudor Jones, that near catastrophe was transformative. He said, "I went to the edge, questioned my very ability as a trader, and decided that I was not going to quit. It was at that point that I said, 'Mr. Stupid, why risk everything on one trade? Why not make your life a pursuit of happiness rather than pain?' From that moment, everything changed. He became, in his own words, more defensive. He said, 'I am always thinking about losing money as opposed to making money.' This is the first crucial secret of the market wizards. Their transformation from gambler to professional began the moment they stopped obsessing over potential gains and started focusing on potential losses. It began with the paramount importance of risk control. You see, the average person enters the market thinking about rewards. They see a stock surging and dream of profits. They catch a headline and imagine getting rich. But the wizards do the exact opposite. Before they even consider potential gains, their first and most critical question is always, where am I getting out if I'm wrong? Larry Hite, founder of Mint Investment Management, a firm managing over $800 million, illustrates this perfectly. He tells the story of meeting one of the world's largest coffee traders, a man who knew everything about coffee, shipping schedules, government officials, supply chains, everything. The man asked him, "Larry, how can you know more about coffee than me?" Haidt replied, "I don't know anything about coffee. I don't even drink it." "How do you trade it then?" the man asked, bewildered. 5 times he was asked, and 5 times Haidt gave the same answer. "I just look at the risk." 3 months later, that coffee expert lost $100 million in the market. He knew everything about coffee, but he didn't respect the risk. This isn't vague philosophy. For the wizards, it's a set of ironclad rules. Larry Haidt's #1 rule at his firm: never risk more than 1% of total equity on any single trade. Let that sink in. If you have a $100,000 account, you'd never risk more than $1,000 on any idea. By doing this, Haidt says, I am indifferent to any individual trade. The emotional attachment vanishes. No single trade can ever knock him out of the game. Michael Marcus, after his painful early lessons, arrived at a similar principle: always bet less than 5% of your money on any one idea. That way, he says, you can be wrong more than 20 times. It'll take ages to lose your money. For Paul Tudor Jones, it's a daily ritual. Every day I assume every position I have is wrong, he says. I know where my stop-risk points are going to be. I do that so I can define my maximum possible drawdown. This is the foundation of their success. It's not about being a genius who's always right. It's about creating a framework where being wrong doesn't destroy you. In fact, William O'Neill, founder of Investors Daily, says you can win even if you're right only half the time. The key, he says, is to lose the least amount of money possible when you're wrong. His personal rule: he never loses more than 7% on any stock he buys. If it drops 7% from his purchase price, he sells. Immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing. He says, letting losses run is the most serious mistake made by most investors. This single idea, cutting losses, is repeated like a sacred chant by almost every trader in the book. Ed Seykota, a pioneer of computerized trading systems, was asked to list the elements of good trading. His answer was elegant. The elements of good trading are: 1. Cutting losses, 2. Cutting losses, and 3. Cutting losses. If you can follow these 3 rules, you may have a chance. This obsessive focus on risk control is what keeps them alive. But survival isn't the same as spectacular success. Cutting losses prevents you from going broke, but what allows you to build a fortune? It's the flip side of the equation, the second golden rule, that's equally important. Let your profits run. Michael Marcus stressed this point. If you don't stay with your winners, you're not going to be able to pay for the losers. Sounds simple, but in practice, it's one of the hardest things for a human being to do. Dr. Van K. Tharp, a psychologist who studied thousands of traders, explains why. Our brains are wired strangely. We are, he says, risk-averse when it comes to profits and risk-seeking when it comes to losses. What does that mean? When we have a profit, our instinct screams to grab it before it disappears. We prefer a small, guaranteed gain over the possibility of a larger, uncertain one. But when we have a loss, our instinct is to hold on, hoping it'll reverse. We prefer the gamble of breaking even over accepting a small, certain loss. In other words, our natural instincts make us do exactly the opposite of what we should. We cut our profits short and let our losses run. The wizards have learned to override this programming through sheer discipline. They have the courage to hold a position, to ride through temporary setbacks, as long as their original reasoning remains intact. Richard Dennis, a legendary trader who turned a tiny $400 stake into a fortune estimated around $200 million, says that 95% of his profits came from only 5% of his trades. Let that sink in. Just a handful of massive home run trades, were responsible for nearly all his wealth. If he'd cut those winners short, his entire career would look completely different. This leads to the second great secret of the market wizards. They all found a trading methodology that resonated with them, and they developed the iron discipline to follow it religiously, no matter what. What's fascinating is how wildly different their methods are. There's no single correct way to trade. Michael Steinhardt, a hedge fund manager with an extraordinary long-term track record, bases his entire philosophy on what he calls variant perception. He tries to develop an idea about a company or market that's fundamentally different from what everyone else believes. For example, when everyone was euphoric about the biotechnology company Genentech and its new drug TPA, Steinhardt developed a contrarian view that the drug would ultimately be minor. He shorted the stock and stayed short for a year and a half, even as it moved against him, and he lost substantial money. But he held on, because his fundamental thesis hadn't changed. Eventually he was proven right, and the stock collapsed. He doesn't use charts. He doesn't use stop-loss orders. His approach is deeply analytical and contrarian. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is Ed Seykota. Seykota is a trend follower. He believes life itself operates on trends. He says, birds start south for the winter and keep on going. He developed some of the first computerized trading systems to identify and ride trends. His approach is almost purely mechanical and technical. He says that, on balance, his fundamental ideas have probably cost him money. Then there's William O'Neill, who developed a very specific hybrid approach for picking winning stocks. He calls it CANSLIM. Each letter represents a key characteristic. For example, C stands for current earnings per share, which should be surging. A represents annual earnings growth. N stands for something new, a new product, new leadership, or a new high in the stock price. He combines robust fundamental criteria with technical timing, buying stocks only as they break out to new highs from solid price bases. And then there's James B. Rogers, Jr., co-founder of the legendary Quantum Fund. His approach is different still. He's the ultimate patient investor. He says one of the best rules is to do nothing, absolutely nothing, unless there's something worth doing. He says, I just wait until there is money lying in the corner, and all I have to do is go over there and pick it up. I do nothing in the meantime. What is that money lying in the corner? For Rogers, it's a combination of deep value and a catalyst for change. He bought German stocks in 1982, not just because they'd been stagnant for 20 years while the German economy boomed, but because there was a catalyst, an upcoming election he believed would bring in a pro-investment government. He also has another specialty, buying value and selling hysteria. When a market gets into a frenzy, he starts looking to go the other way. He famously shorted gold in 1980, near the absolute peak of its historic blow-off. When asked why, he said he recognized the, quote, fingerprint of hysteria. The chaos was something that simply couldn't sustain itself. So you've got a fundamental contrarian, a computerized trend follower, a stock-picking specialist, and a global macro investor who waits for hysteria. Their methods couldn't be more different, yet they're all wildly successful. What does this tell us? It tells us the specific methodology isn't the secret. The secret is finding a methodology you believe in, that fits your personality, and then having the iron discipline to execute it flawlessly. Marty Schwartz, a trader who went from losing money for a decade to becoming a championship trader, tells a story that perfectly captures this. For 9 years, he was a fundamental analyst. He was intelligent, worked incredibly hard, but consistently lost money. He was, in his own words, always broke. Then he made a complete shift. He abandoned fundamentals and dove deep into technical analysis. He subscribed to newsletters, studied charts obsessively, developed his own indicators based on moving averages. And he started winning. Consistently. Was it because technical analysis is inherently superior? No. It was because technical analysis was the right approach for him. It matched his mind, his temperament. But changing his method was only half the battle. The other half was a psychological transformation. He says, I became a winner when I was able to separate my ego needs from making money. when I was able to accept being wrong. Before, admitting I was wrong was more upsetting than losing the money. When I became a winner, I said, I figured it out, but if I'm wrong, I'm getting the hell out, because I want to save my money and go on to the next trade. That shift, from needing to be right to needing to win, is the psychological leap every great trader must make. It requires humility. It requires discipline. It requires an almost brutal honesty with oneself. And it requires an incredible amount of hard work. This is another thread running through the book, demolishing the myth of the trader as a lucky gambler. These people aren't just fortunate, they're obsessive. Marty Schwartz still puts in 12 hours a day, calculating his ratios and posting his own charts. My attitude is that I always want to be better prepared than someone I'm competing against, he says. David Ryan, a young trader who won the U.S. investing championship 3 times with triple-digit returns, describes his process as a treasure hunt. When he started working for William O'Neill, he'd take charts home every night and on weekends. He studied historical patterns of great winning stocks to ingrain in my mind what a stock looked like before it made a major move. He keeps a detailed diary of every trade, writing down his reasons for buying. He says, the more disciplined you can get, the better you're going to do in the market. Brian Gelber, a dominant trader in the T-bond pit, says he talks to about 25 other traders every day. He's a great listener, constantly gathering information, trying to gauge the mood and positions of other players. The work is relentless because the market is a relentless and unforgiving opponent. The wizards know their edge doesn't come from a one-time flash of brilliance. It comes from daily preparation. It comes from showing up day after day and doing the work. This dedication allows them to develop a deep, almost intuitive feel for the markets they trade. Tom Baldwin, the single largest trader in the T-bond pit, describes it this way. When he started, with zero experience, he just stood in the pit for 6 hours a day, every single day. He said, I would see the same scenarios develop over and over again. He didn't need formal education in trading. He learned through total immersion, by paying absolute attention, until the patterns became second nature. This brings us to one of the most profound ideas in the book, a concept that ties everything together: psychology. Jack Schwager's journey led him to conclude that attitude mattered more than approach. But what is the right attitude? What is the psychology of a winner? Schwager interviewed 2 men who specialize in this very question, Dr. Van K. Tharp, a research psychologist, and Ed Seykota, the brilliant trader who became a mentor to Michael Marcus. Dr. Tharp developed a test that measures winning and losing traits. The profile of a losing trader, he says, is someone who's highly stressed, has a negative outlook, experiences lots of internal conflict, and blames others when things go wrong. They're impatient and crave action now. Winners are different. They believe money isn't the most important thing. Trading well is. They believe it's okay to lose. In fact, they accept losses as part of the game. They see trading as exactly that, a game. And because they've done their homework and mentally rehearsed, they possess quiet confidence. They believe they've won the game before it even starts. Perhaps the most crucial trait, according to Tharp, is that winners take responsibility for their results. Losers blame the market, their broker, insider manipulation, anything but themselves. When a winner has a losing trade, they don't point fingers. They ask, what did I do wrong? What rule did I break? How can I avoid making that same mistake again? This ownership of results is the key to growth. Ed Seykota takes this idea into territory that feels almost mystical. He has a phrase that echoes throughout the book, a statement so simple yet so profound that it forces you to re-examine everything you thought you knew about success and failure. He says, win or lose, everybody gets what they want out of the market. At first it sounds absurd. Who wants to lose money? But Seykota explains. Some people, he says, seem to enjoy losing. They win by losing. He tells the story of a trader he knew who would build a small stake of $10,000 into $250,000 over and over again. And then, like clockwork, he'd change his personality and lose it all back. Why? Because on some subconscious level he was getting what he wanted. He got the thrill of the game, he got to play the martyr, he got sympathy from his friends, he got to be the center of attention. Sakota believes that if people look deeply enough into their trading patterns, they'll discover that, on balance, they're getting what they want, even if they refuse to admit it. This is perhaps the ultimate lesson of market wizards. The market is a mirror. It reflects your own psychology back at you. If you're undisciplined, the market will take your money. If you're driven by ego, the market will humble you. If you have unresolved psychological conflicts, the market will expose them. The journey to becoming a great trader isn't about mastering the market. It's about mastering yourself. It's about developing unwavering belief in your method, while maintaining the humility to know you can be wrong. It's about having the conviction to hold a winning trade, and the discipline to cut a losing one without hesitation. It's about doing the hard work, day in and day out, to be better prepared than your competition. And it's about understanding your own mind, your own fears, and your own desires. The wizards aren't superhumans. They're people who've confronted their own flaws and weaknesses in the brutal arena of the market and have emerged stronger, wiser, and more disciplined. Their stories teach us that success isn't a gift, it's a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned. As we wrap up our journey through market wizards, it's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed. We've met so many brilliant minds, each with their own unique style, their own complex strategies. But if we step back, what's the single most powerful lesson we can extract from all of this? For me, it's the profound realization that there is no holy grail. There's no magic formula for success, in markets or in life. The endless search for that one secret indicator, that one perfect strategy, is a chase that leads nowhere. The book is powerful proof that how you trade matters far less than how you think. The common thread among these legends isn't their method, it's their mindset. It's a mindset built on almost paradoxical qualities. They have supreme confidence, yet they're deeply humble. They know they can win, but they're also acutely aware of how easily they can be wrong. They're incredibly aggressive when they have an edge, but obsessively defensive when protecting their capital. They're disciplined rule followers, but also flexible enough to recognize when the game has changed. This isn't just a book about trading. It's a masterclass in applied psychology. It teaches us that the greatest obstacle to success is usually ourselves. Our ego, our fear, our impatience, our natural human tendency to avoid small pains, which often leads to catastrophic ones. So how can we start applying these powerful lessons in our own lives, starting today? You don't need to open a brokerage account or have millions of dollars to begin thinking like a market wizard. Here are 3 simple, practical actions you can take. First, start a decision journal. Whether you're making investments, career choices, or even personal decisions, do what David Ryan does. Before you act, write down exactly why you're making that choice. What are your assumptions? What do you expect to happen? This simple act forces clarity. More importantly, it creates an honest record that allows you to learn from both your successes and failures, without the filter of faulty memory. Second, embrace the 1% rule. This is Larry Height's cornerstone principle, but it applies to so much more than money. In any new venture, in any risk you take, ask yourself, am I betting the farm, or am I betting just 1% of my emotional and financial capital? By keeping your bets small, especially when you're starting out, you give yourself the greatest gift of all, the ability to survive your mistakes. You stay in the game long enough to learn how to win. And third, learn to do nothing. This might be the hardest advice in our hyperactive world. But as James Rogers so wisely points out, most of the time, the right action is no action. Resist the urge to constantly be doing something. Instead, cultivate the patience to wait for truly great opportunities, the ones that feel like money lying in the corner. Whether it's an investment, a business idea, or a relationship, the best opportunities are often the ones that don't need to be forced. They feel clear, obvious, and right. Ultimately, the message of Market Wizards is one of profound optimism. It tells us that extraordinary success isn't reserved for the naturally gifted. It's the result of discipline, hard work, and most importantly, a relentless journey of self-discovery. The market, in all its brutal honesty, is simply a powerful mirror. It shows us who we are. And the greatest traders are those who have the courage to look into that mirror and never stop working to become a better version of themselves. That was our journey into Market Wizards by Jack D. Schwager. We've touched on some core principles today, but there's so much more depth to these stories. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. Reading the book is like taking the journey yourself. It's in the personal stories, the moments of despair and triumph, that the lessons truly come alive. This summary is just here to show you what's possible. If any of these ideas about discipline, psychology, and risk have sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning to trade. It's an exploration of the mindset of excellence, and it might just change how you approach every challenge in your life. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if this exploration brought you any value, a simple click on the like button and subscribing to this channel would mean the world. It helps us continue bringing these powerful ideas to more people. Let's keep exploring the wisdom of the world's greatest minds together.